Now we've looked at VSTs, let's take a look at effects chains. An effects chain is a preset collection of more than one VST effect at its own container interface that can be loaded as if it were a single VST with its own user-specified controls. There are several presets to start with, but it's relatively easy to create your own, and we'll look at creating one shortly. First, let's have a look at an existing one. To load an existing effects chain, we need to navigate and drag it in from the browser, or right-click in the effects bin and select it from the right-click context menu. I'm going to drag it across from the browser. I'm going to use a guitar and bass preset called Super Chunk, and I'm dropping this into a distorted guitar track. Now let's switch it off initially and have a listen back to the guitar without it first. And now let's switch it back on and see what difference it makes. I think you could call that Super Chunk. So at the top we can see the name of the chain, and to the right of it is the global bypass switch that will bypass all the effects in the chain. Now let's take a further look at what this chain consists of. At the bottom we can see the VSTs that make up the chain, and in this particular chain we have guitar rig and an equalizer. The signal flows from left to right, and there are controls either side to control gain staging. To open any of the effects interfaces that make up the chain, just double click on the effects button. Similarly, if you want to bypass just one of the effects, then use that effects on-off switch. The controls in the centre panel are user defined. This one only has one button and 2 knobs, but it's possible to insert up to 6 buttons and 6 knobs per effects chain. Each button or knob can be assigned up to 4 parameters on any of the effects in the chain. We'll look at this in more detail when we create our own effects chain, but for now let's see what these are assigned to. Scoop first. Right-click over the button and select Edit Control. We can see that it's assigned to only one parameter, and that's the Band 4 Enable button on the EQ. If we open the EQ up, we can see the band has a big cut in the lower mids, hence the moniker Scoop. It's scooping out the mid frequencies. Scoop frequency therefore must be assigned to the frequency control of the EQ and scoop level the gain control. And as you can see, that's the case. So now we've had a look at a basic effects chain, let's create something a little bit more complex. Here's the same lead guitar track we used earlier, with the send now deleted, but the delay is still in the effects bin. Let's remind ourselves of what it sounds like. Let's add the multi-voice chorus flanger effects from the selection over to the right and set it to stereo flanging. Then we'll add the SWA and set the beats per minute setting to 140 to match the tempo. Now let's have a listen to that. Once we have these soundings set up how we want them, we could of course use it like that. The downside is that every time we want to make a change to the effects, we need to open one or all of the effects. It's the same thing if we want to use it in other tracks or future projects, we'd need to insert all of the effects. The alternative is to make it into an effects chain. To do that, we right-click on the effects bin and select Convert Bin to Effects Chain. This will create an effects in the effects bin into an effects chain. We now have one effect in the bin called Effects Chain, probably not the most descriptive name. Let's open the newly created chain by double-clicking on it. Now we're presented with a blank effects user interface, and the first thing we'll need to do is give it a more descriptive name. Change that by double-clicking in the name field and entering the text. The next thing I want to do is change the effects order. I don't want to flange or wah the delays, I want the wah'd flange to be delayed. So I click drag on the delay module and drag it over to the right. You'll see that the order changes. Now we can add some controls for the parameters that we're most likely to want to tweak. The first setting that I might want to change is the delay time on the flanger. So I'm going to right click in the control area of the effects chain and select Add Knob. That will open the control properties where I can specify the parameters I want to control and their start and end times. The first thing to decide is what to call the control. As I'm actually going to assign the knob to two parameters, the flange delay and depth, I'm just going to call it flange. However, I want to set it up so that the depth of the flange reduces as the delay increases. This is done in a similar way to how we set up controls to mirror each other in the custom groups section. First thing to assign is the first parameter. To do that, I click on the destination drop down and select the delay parameter from the list. I want the delays to increase as I turn the knob clockwise, so leave the start and finish times at 0 and 100% accordingly. Next parameter to add is a depth control from the flanger. But this time I want it to reduce as the delay increases, so I change the start to 100 and reduce the end to 0. I could of course just as easily use the figures 80 and 20 respectively if I didn't want the full range of movement. I'll click on OK, move the flanger interface so we can see it, and give our new control a quick tweak to see if we can see the movement in the flanger. The controls are responding in the way that we expect. Next knob I'll add is the wah tempo, so we have some control over that. This time though, we're going to use the learn function. I'll click in the background space of the controls area just to make sure that any active controls are deselected. Then right click in the same area and select Learn Knob. I'm now going to move to the wah and move the tempo control. Once I've done that, I move back to the control area, right click and deselect the Learn option. At this stage we're warned how many controls we've touched and do we wish to assign these controls. Click on Yes and we get a knob called Tempo, named after the parameter we touched. Note that we can touch up to 4 controls per knob or button, and it will be named multi in that case. Of course, we can always change that or any of the other parameters associated with a control by right-clicking and selecting Edit Control. Moving on to delay, I might want a special effect where the original signal is muted, so all that we hear is the delay signal. To start with, I'm going to have to open the delays interface. To do that, I double-click on its name in the bottom. Using the right-click Learn Button command, we click on the Listen button in the delay, and then deselect the Learn command. We get asked the same question about whether we wish to keep the control assignments, which we do, and this time we have a button called Listen in button position 1. Let's change the name and the position by right-clicking on it and select Edit Control. I'll change the position field to 3 and the name to Delay Only. When this button is lit, only the delay is monitored. We could of course just as easily swap the start and end values and call a button Mix. Let's check that works OK. I'm going to use similar methods to add several more controls, and then we'll look at adding another effect and a more complicated parameter changing method. Now what do we do if we want to add another effect? The answer to that is to right click towards the bottom where the individual effects are displayed and then select the effect from the context menu. I'm going to add a reverb just to finish this chain off. And now that's added, I'll put in a couple more controls and then demonstrate a more complex parameter control. So now let's look at something a little more complicated. I'm going to add a mix knob for the reverb signal. I'm going to do this using the Learn function by right-clicking and adding the dry and reverb levels. Once that's done, we answer yes. I'm going to swap the dry start finish values so that the more reverb there is, the less dry and vice versa, effectively making a mix control, but I'm going to constrain the dry so there's never less than 70%. The reverb I'm going to constrain so there's never more than 70%. Now I'm going to name the control Mix and then OK out of the control properties box. So let's see how that sounds now. As you can hear, there's some pretty funky sounds going on there. And that's how you create your own effects chain. Finally, let's hide all of the interfaces. Straight away, you can see one of the advantages of effects chains. Of course, any individual effects can be bypassed using the relevant buttons at the bottom. But we also have control over the most common parameters for our flanged wire repeater. Anytime that we do need more access to controls, we simply double-click the required effect to gain access to the individual interface.